Hey everyone, this is Lester Knutsen. Welcome to our webcast on backups and recovery and HDR. And I'm going to go ahead and dive right in and start up. I think backups are one of the most important thing a DBA has to do. And over the years, I've gotten a lot of calls for folks saying, please restore or help us restore our system. One of my favorite stories is a company called up on a 6 o'clock in the evening, said, our system just crashed. We need to restore it. Can you come help us? And I said, sure, I'll come out. And I came out the next morning, 7 o'clock, walked in. I said, okay, where's the console? Give me the tapes and let's get started. And they handed me a box of unlabeled tapes. And I said, which is the tape you did the last backup on? And the DBA said, I don't know. That's why backups are really important, is because you may have to restore. And the only way to get a system back is to restore it. Most of the time, you don't have to restore, but that's that once in a while when you do, it's really important to have them. And with that particular company, I wrote a little program to read every tape and tell me what was on the tapes. And then we figured out which was the oldest tape, and they were able to restore their system and get up and running successfully. So let's dive right in. I'm Lester Knutsen. I've been working with Informix since 1983. Many of you know me from the Informix user group and the Washington area Informix user group that I've been working with since the beginning of those groups. A couple of guidelines. The webcast is being recorded, and if everything goes well, the webcast and slides will be available in a few days. So that's if everything goes well. I hope everybody can hear me all right. We had sound problems earlier when I was testing this out. So in the chat, please let me know if there are any sound problems. Please also mute yourself. The background noise is very distracting, and so I'm trying to keep it going here. Please, but if you can, please mute yourself to limit the background noise. Now, if you have questions, there is a chat button. I already see somebody has found it. Yeah, there is a little bit of crackling. That's what I heard earlier too on the sound. Sorry about that. I hope it'll work all right. But if you have questions, please put your questions in the chat. And I'm going to save a little bit of time at the end of this to try and go through and answer as many questions as I can. So this is about backups and high availability. And I'm going to talk about backups. I'm going to talk about testing backups to make sure they're working, because nothing is worse than spending all this time backing up, and then when you really need it, it doesn't work. And so the more you practice restoring and the more you test your backups, the better off you are. I'm also going to talk about HDR, and we're going to do 6 little demos here. The last one is actually going to be setting up an HDR server between my primary and a secondary. And then perhaps if we have time, we'll do an HDR switch. So let me start off with the backup options. You have database backup options, you have table level backup options, and you have server level backup options. Database level, the most common one is DB export and DB import. They will back up a whole database. Table, you can unload any table at any time using SQL and get a backup. For your server backups, you want to use Ontape or Onbar, and I'll talk about both of them in just a few minutes. But let's start with table level backups. The simplest way to back up a table is to do an unload. And then if you need to load it, you can do a load. Unload and loads are Informix keywords that are extensions to SQL. So they're not in standard SQL, they're Informix extensions, but they unload a table to an ASCII file. DB export and DB import create a whole database and unload it to ASCII files. That's the brilliance of them, is that they, let me mute everybody, I've got some background noise there. DB import and DB export, hang on, if you guys or anybody's not muted, please mute yourself, as I am hearing a bit of background noise. Anyway, because DB import and DB export create ASCII files, they're portable to other systems. And they're great, super easy to use. The one downside is they lock the database during an export. And that's so that you get a consistent picture of a database. On load and on unload are the old binary programs. They will unload or load a database in binary format. And they, let me mute a couple more here. But because they're binary, they only can be loaded on the same hardware and the same version of Informix as the on-unload was done. I've not used them much lately. I used to use them a lot. Onbar and Ontape are the two key tools for backing up a whole server. Whereas DB export does one database, SQL unloads does one table, this does the whole server. And it will output the whole server, and it has everything you need to restore the whole server. And we'll show you an example of doing an Onbar or Ontape backup in just a little bit. So what's the difference between Onbar and Ontape? Here's a little chart I pulled from the IBM support guide. And basically, Onbar and Ontape do about everything except for a few things that's on the second page that they don't share. The guts, the engine to do the backup, is the same for both of them. What's different is the interface. Onbar requires an external storage manager. Now, IBM has a built-in one called PSM that you can use. Ontape does not. Ontape will work directly to a device. Onbar, you can do a restore to a point in time, which you cannot do directly with Ontape. You can do it with Ontape by not restoring certain logs. And I'll show you logs in a little bit. The key thing with Onbar, I think, is the performance. Because it uses a storage manager, you can back up to 8 tape drives at a time. And I've had very large databases, multiple terabytes. To do an Ontape backup would take weeks. To do an Onbar backup with multiple tape drives, you can do it very quickly in parallel. And to me, that's the real reason. If your database is big, you want to be using Onbar. If your database is small, you want to use Ontape. Now, one of the new features in Ontape that I think is important is to be able to back up or restore to the cloud. And Ontape has that built in, so you can take your backups and put them directly on the cloud. So the choice, if you have a large server and need parallel backups to reduce the time, you need to use Onbar. If you have a storage mechanism with multiple tape drives, you need to be using Onbar. And if you require point-in-time capabilities, you want to use Onbar. If you want something simple and easy, use Ontape. And both of these work while the database server is online and people are using it. I was teaching a class last week and somebody kept saying, don't we have to take the database down to do backups? No, both Onbar and Ontape keep track of all the changes that have been done and they track what has been backed up can be done while the server is online. I'm going to go full screen here for a few minutes so you can see the slides bigger. Now, one key thing is you can't mix Onbar and Ontape. You can. They both will work, but there'll be problems. If you do your logs in one and the backup in the other, you won't be able to restore logs. You have to do both logs and the whole server on one or the other, not mixing. Now, I want to just do a quick thing on backup logs. The last webcast I did last month was all about backing up logs, and you can see the replay here. And this is my first demo. I have a little benchmark here I'm going to run. It's going to keep my server busy. And I have automatic logs set up. So while it's running, my logs are getting backed up automatically. I don't have to do anything. And the key to backing up logs automatically is, and if I'm backing up to a directory, so if I look at backups, Tiger logs, you'll see all my backup files. And if I do an on mode -L, you see I'm at log number 892 now. Do an on mode -L to switch logs, and there's 893 there. The key to doing this, and I talked about this in the last webcast, is to use the alarm program and have your logs get backed up to a directory. So let's talk about the Informix Server backup. Something to think about, besides backing up the server, you need copies of your onconfig file, your SQL host file, the Informix software, your services file, your host equip file, if you're using that, a layout of your DB spaces. If you have to start over from scratch, you can get some of this off of your Ontape backups, but it's much quicker to do a restore if you have this saved someplace. Also, it's helpful to have database schemas saved. And if you're using Onbar, you'll need the IXBAR file for a restore. So it's very important to, in addition to doing backups, save this information on a regular basis someplace else. Now, Informix supports 3 levels of backup. 0 is the whole server. Level 1 is any page that has changed since the last level 0. Level 2 is any page that's changed since the last level 1. What I like to recommend is if you can do a 0 every day, do a 0 every day. If you've got a big site with a multi-terabyte database and it takes too long to do a level 0, do a level 0 once a week and then a level 1 every day. And that way the level 1 will only get the changes since that last change. Now, if your level 1 start getting too big, then you can do a level 2. And that will get the changes since the last level 1. Now, that means you will need to do a restore the level 0, the level 1, and the last level 2. So just be prepared with that if that happens. A key thing is to label the tapes or files if you're using them, and to be able to coordinate the Informix backup with your logical log backups. Just as an example here, I'm using the automatic backup to a directory built in Informix, and it labels everything automatically with machine name, server number, and then the log number. And this is key because if I had to do a restore, one of the prompts you'll see is what log do you want to start the restore on after it's done the server restore. and I need to know where these are. If you're doing them some other way, please make sure you label your tapes or your disk files so that you know what they are. Now, to back up the server in Informix using Ontape, you change tape dev. The default is dev tape dev, which probably doesn't exist in most systems. You can change it to dev null, which means you can do backups, but the backups go to dev null, which means you can never do a restore. You can do it to whatever your tape device is. You can do it, and this is my favorite way, is to a directory where you say backup, and I like to put the Informix server name in the path and then a directory of some name. Now, what you'll see on the system I'm using here, I have a directory called backups, and I can have multiple servers there. I have one server called Tiger 4, and I'm my log, my Ontape. And in my Ontape, I have my Ontape backup the last few days as I was setting this up. Now, backing up a server to disk, the entire backup must fit on one file. This is getting easier nowadays because we have huge disk drives and SANs where you can back up. Now, even after you've backed up to disk, you want to take it off-site at least. Back it up to a storage device, to a tape, or what I do a lot nowadays is SCP it to another drive, so that you have and it's the best practice, I think, is to have 3 copies of your backup: a local copy, a remote copy on physical device that you have access to, like a tape, and then a third one in the cloud someplace. That way you can always get one of those 3 back. Now, backing up Informix to disk, let's just take a look at that. And I'm going to PI the on config just to show you how I've got this set up. So I have my backups going to the directory, Home Informix Backups, Tiger 4 Ontape. And that's that directory. So if I do a backup now, if I do an Ontape-S, now this is important. This is the last backup I did. It's called Tiger 4.4L0. Watch what happens to it after I do this level 0. And it jumps from 30% to 100% because the rest of the space was free. And it tells me what log I will need to have available if I want to restore logs. Now, if I look at that directory, what it's done, it took the last backup and renamed it to level 0 with a time and date stamp of when it was done. And the new backup is now called Tiger 4.4-level 0. If I do a second backup, and let's say I do a level 1, I think this is brilliant. I have a new file here with a level 1, which has, I really haven't done anything, so it's got the few changes that were changed since I did that level 0. Now, restoring a server. When you restore a server, you need to have the onconfig file there and the software and any configuration files. You need to have the links, not the devices. You don't need to run on spaces and create the DB spaces, but you need to have the links to those devices. They need to be there. They can all be empty. And then you start an Informix Ontape or Onbar restore, and then you'll get prompted to restore and roll forward the logical logs. Now you also want to make sure you have Informix Stir restored. If the whole machine crashed and you're bringing it up on another machine, you probably want to have a backup of your Informix software that you can do a restore on. You want to have your onconfig, your SQL host, and your TCP services and host file set up. I remember helping someone who was trying to do a restore, and everything worked except that they couldn't connect to it after they'd done the restore. And the reason was because the etc services file on the new server was different and had different port numbers for the services they were using for Informix. So you want to recreate the links to the devices. And this is very simple. If I do an onstat-d, here are all the devices that my server uses. And I need to make sure that I have Informix chunks, Tiger 4, and all those devices are there. They can be empty files, that's okay. They can be links to raw devices, that's okay. But the device names need to be there and they need to be pointing to someplace else. This is one way to convert. I was helping someone recently convert from encrypted disk, one version of encrypted disk to another version of encrypted disk. And all we did was we took their list of devices, did a backup, changed the links to point to the new encryption, and then did a restore. And to Informix, since the encryption was done at the disk level, to Informix, it just looked like links to another device, and then it was able to do the restore quite happily. Also need to make sure, though, that permissions or read write for the user and group only, and belonging to the user Informix and the group Informix only, or the restore will not happen. Now, to do a restore, the server must be online, and you type Ontape -R. So let's go do a restore. I'm going to shut down my server. And I'm going to open another window here where I'm going to do a tail. I thought I had it. There it is. Okay. Informix has stopped. And we'll bounce between those. So I'm going to do an Ontape -R. And it says, here's the device I'm going to restore. Press return to continue. I'm going to say yes. This is your one chance to see that you have all these devices laid out. And so this is a very good, if you're putting this on a new server, to go look and make sure that you have these here. If they're not here, or if the permissions are not right, the restore will fail. I'm going to say continue restore, yes. Now, this is a key prompt, and it can be confusing. The way I'm doing it, this prompt will work, and I can say yes here. It says, do you want to back up logs? And that's because it has recognized that there are logs there since I did my last backup. And it's asking me, do I want to back those up? Where this prompt is confusing is if you have one tape in your tape drive and you say yes now, guess where it's going to write the logs? It's going to overwrite your Ontape backup in that tape drive. The same thing, if you're backing up from one file, not a directory, it's going to overwrite that one file. I'm going to say yes now, and it's going to create a log backup in my directory, and then it starts the restore. And there are messages going on here as it's doing the restore, telling me what's happening. And then when it's finished, it says level 1 is finished. Do you have any logs? I'm going to say I'll archive level 1. I'm going to say no. I could say yes. And it says, do you want to restore log tapes? I'll say yes. And it will start reading my log tapes. Rolling 4. And again, what it's doing now is bringing me back to the last log, which I backed up right before the server. I'm going to press return. Forgot to do that. Now it's over. When you do a restore, Informix is in quiescent mode, so you can check the backup. This is a key point. It doesn't automatically go online. You can check it when everything looks good. You bring it to online mode. So here are the prompts again. Doing on a restore from disk. And this is a key prompt. Do you want to back up the logs? Typically, I tell folks to say no, unless you really know what you're doing and your backup, your on-tape backup is write protected if it's in a tape drive. If you're backing up your logs and your server to directories, you can say yes here. But otherwise say no, because it may overwrite your backup without warning. When I used to teach DBA classes, one of the things we would do is crash everybody's server and they would have to do a restore. And back in the old days when everybody was backing up to one file instead of the directory, usually somebody would accidentally say yes here and overwrite and lose their backup. So you have to be very careful with that. And then you're in single user mode when it's done. A couple of other things about on-tape backups, which I like, is you can back up to standard input, standard output, which is a pipe. And there are a couple of uses of this. One is you can do on-tape -S -L0. And when you do this, you will get no prompts. By doing the L0, if I do an on-tape -S capital L0, it doesn't prompt me. It just goes and does the backup. And if you're going to script backups, that's the best way to script your backups. But by doing it to standard input output, this allows you to either gzip or compress your backups, or also run it to an encryption program. And I'm a big fan of on my production stuff, encrypting it when I back it up. I have several boxes of tapes back in my office that are tapes from old systems I no longer have, and the tape no longer operate, but they're unencrypted tapes, and I don't know what to do with. I have to get them, erased some way. And to avoid that, I encrypt all my backups now, particularly when you're sending them off to a cloud, because you never know where accidentally a backup will show up. And running them through a pipe, you can run an encrypt program of some kind here, and that will create an encrypted backup for you. Another thing I want to talk about is external backups, because I see this more and more. You have a VM. The VM does snapshots. Why should I do Informix backups? You have a SAN. The SAN does cloning. Why should I do an Informix backup? The key thing here is that a lot of stuff is in memory and not in disk. When you do a VM snapshot, you only get what's on disk. When you do a SAN disk clone, you're not going to get what's in memory on the server. I was working with a site, they were doing SAN disk cloning, and I kept saying, there's another step we have to do. And they kept saying, no, 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 this works. And they tried it 4 or 5 times on a small test database, and every time it worked. The SanDisk cloning did it. One of the reasons it worked really well was the database was not busy. So the disk had a copy of everything that was in memory. To do an external backup, and this is supported by Informix, you want to do an on mode -C block. That will force a checkpoint. That will force it to write everything to disk that's in memory, and then it will block anything from changing until your clone is done. And then you want to do your clone or your VM snapshot. And then when you're done, you need to unblock it so users can continue doing updates. Now, while it's blocked, reading programs can still read. Updates will be blocked. And then when you unblock it, you can go back. Now, hopefully your disk clone software only takes a few seconds. Your snapshots mostly take a few seconds. This should be fairly quick to do. But it's really important to get everything that's in memory synced to disk when you do an external backup. Now, testing backups. Another good story I have is we had a client that did backups every day forever. And they did not test their backups. And after doing this for 4 years, they decided to do a test restore. And guess what? It didn't work. The tape drive had gotten out of alignment. And the vendor came out and fixed the tape drive. It still could not read any of their backup tapes. They had to start, very important. I think it's as important to do a restore or at least to test your backups in some way. And one way Informix provides is the ARC Checker tool. This is a tool that can validate an Informix backup. You can run it on a different machine, but what it will do is read the backup and tell you if everything on there is good or not. And if it can't read the backup, it will tell you the error that you will get. Now, another way to test a backup is to do restore. And I work with a lot of sites that once a week will take production and restore it to development. I think that's a great method of both testing your restore process, practicing backups and restores, and also getting your development environment refreshed. The other key to testing your backups is then when you have a real problem, and you know, you hope you never have a problem, but when you have a real problem, if you have been practicing restores, it's easy to do a restore. It's when you haven't been practicing that restores become difficult. So if you're a DBA and you haven't done a restore in a while, I would suggest go do a test restore. Now, ARC Checker is a tool that can validate Ontape or Onbar. It will read your on config if you run it on the same machine, and we'll test the backup. There is a ARC Checker configuration file that you need to use if you're going to run it on a different machine. If you're running on the same machine, it will read it right out of the on config file. There are a couple of parameters there to set up. There are a bunch of options. I like to just do ARC Checker -TDSV if I'm on the same machine. And so let's go over here. I'm going to, whoops. I cut and pasted that. Now let's bring it. Cut and paste is the best way to make sure I don't get the commands wrong when I'm doing it. Boom.
That was quick. It will take as long as a restore takes. So a good way of timing, it'll actually be faster than a restore because it is writing. But it's here. These are all tables that check. And what you want to look at is at the very end, table check passed, how many tables it passed, and that the archive validated passed. That tells you you have a good backup. And like I said, it's a good practice. If you don't do restores, to at least run ARC Checker once a week on your backups so that you know they are good and worth it. And here's another example of just running ARC Checker. And what you want to do is see the archive validation passed at the very end there. Now, let's talk about high availability. And I view this part of backup. High availability is having a standby server ready to take over, usually on a different machine. In fact, best practice is to have it on a different machine. And it's there running. And what we'll do in the next couple of minutes is set up an HDR system. But before I do that, let me just talk about replication because there are 5 different types of Informix replication. There is high availability data replication, which is a full server. It's a copy of your whole server on a standby site. And it can be running, ready to take over when you give it the commands to do it. Informix has something called enterprise replication, which is ER or CDR. And the difference is this does not replicate everything. This replicates what you tell it to do. So you can replicate down to a table or to a column in a table if you want, not the whole server. HDR does a whole server. Enterprise replication can do part of it. One of my early setups with enterprise replication was I had a client that had a central server up in Maryland and 80 offices around the country. They had 4 tables from the central server that were replicated out to all 80 offices. Everything else on the 80 offices was replicated back to the central server, so the central server had a full copy of everything. It's very flexible. Because it's flexible, it's a whole separate talk on how to set it up, and we'll do that sometime. Informix also has shared disk replication clusters. And what this is when you have a big SAN disk array and several servers sharing the same disk. So you're not really replicating data, you're sharing the same disk. This is often called MOC or SDS clusters, shared disk secondaries. And it's really good for load balancing when you need to bring on another server, but you don't want to have separate disks going on. You can also do what's called continuous log restore. And, this is a very easy setup. It's also called log shipping, where you take the logs from your server and send them off-site, and you're restoring them continually on a second server. And last but not least, Informix has something called a flexible grid, which is really a cluster of servers that you can run admin commands on, like adding a DB space to 600 servers. That's one command. So those are the types of replication. HDR is primarily used for disaster recovery, and that is when you want a server that has a copy of your current system in real time, so that if anything happened to your main server, you could bring up the copy and it would have the last committed transaction on the copy. Now, you can also use replication for load balancing.
a lot of folks I know move their reporting off to the copy. So the primary server is used for your basic data entry, data input, your heavy inputting, and then your reporting is run off of the copy. That's a great way to do load balancing. You can also use it for scaling so that you can add replication servers when you need to scale out. Informix does support something called redirected writes. So where you do a write on one of the secondary servers, it gets redirected to the primary server and then replicated to the secondary server. And the key is high availability. You can also use replication for geographic distribution. Let's say you have databases around the world. It might work best to have people connect to a local database that's replicated. That way it will be fast and you're not dependent on network lag. I think it's interesting what everybody working from home is doing to networks in our neighborhood. My network usage at home definitely has gone up quite a bit. And a number of providers have started throttling. They don't tell you that, but if you notice your network getting slower, that may be why. You can also use replication to keep a central repository. I know a number of clients we work with where you have one master server that has a copy of everything from the other servers. So why replicate? High availability, I think, is the key important reason to do it. And that's what I want to show you. Now, high availability HDR replication, you have a primary and you have a secondary server. And the idea is that secondary is running ready to take over. It's in read-only mode. If you don't use it, it's no cost. And then when it does take over, the license from the primary transfers to the secondary. If you do use it for read-only queries, then you need to get a license for it. So HDR has been part of the code set since version 7. It's 20 years old, actually more than 20, it's about 30 years old. It's basic, it works, and as you're going to see in a few minutes, it's very quick to set up and get running. There are a bunch of new enhancements in HDR that in the later releases, and they continue to enhance it. 14.10 FC3 had a bunch of improvements to performance for replication that might be worth upgrading just for that. Now, with HDR, you also have something called remote standalone secondaries. You can only have one secondary, but you can have many remote standby secondaries. And think of a remote standby secondary as a secondary server that's running, but it's not dependent on the network performance that a secondary does. When you commit on the primary, it has to go to the secondary right away. A remote secondary can have a delay, and it's not going to slow down the primary. If there's a delay between the primary and the secondary, it may impact the primary and performance on that. We were working with a company that had a data center in Newark. They had a primary and secondary set up, worked great. They moved the secondary offsite to another data center in another state, and performance was terrible. It could not keep up with it. They converted it to a remote secondary, and performance worked fine. Now it lags, so it might miss a few transactions. This is the key. RSS may miss a few transactions depending on your network speed, but it's not going to slow down the primary. And you can use this for applications that can connect to any one of these. A whole separate talk we need to do is on Connection Manager and using Connection Manager with multiple servers to connect to the one that has the lightest load. So RSS is the same thing, and the steps I'm going to show you in a minute to set up a secondary, you do the same steps for RSS. The command names change, but it basically allows you to deal with network latency. One of the other advantages of RSS is you can actually configure it to delay the apply. And we've had customers that say, you know, I want to wait 4 hours so that if something went wrong on the primary, like somebody dropped the customer table, we could go to the secondary and get it back. And you can do a delay with RSS servers so you can get your data back that way. A lot of folks will put an RSS server off in a bunker someplace. So they'll have a primary and a HDR secondary in their data centers, and then an RSS node off in a bunker someplace. Now, with enterprise replication, you have the ability to replicate anywhere. And it can go bidirectionally. It can go to all the servers at once. It's very flexible. It does take a bit more work setting it up. With shared disk secondaries, you have multiple servers connecting to one set of disk drives. And you can combine all of these. You can combine shared disk secondaries and primaries and secondaries as needed and get very pretty pictures with this. Want to talk for a minute about continuous log restore. This is originally when we would set up HDR and we didn't have a network connection. We depended on tape drives. The idea is you would have 2 servers in 2 separate locations, and you would send your log tapes from one server to the other. In the remote standby server, you're always doing a restore. So you're doing an on-tape restore, reading in the log tapes. It would finish them. It would just prompt you, enter the next log tape. You would wait. You can do this with disk files too by SFTPing the disk files over to the secondary. And it's always reading those log tapes. And when there are no more log tapes, it just waits until you get the log tapes over there. So there are a number of things that you can automate with this. One thing with sending log tapes is you can automate that in the alarm program like I showed you last week for backing up the log tapes. So let's talk about setting up HDR. And I'm going to dive right in. I have a different set of I know the chat's probably going crazy, so I will get to the chat, I promise. In a few minutes. Okay. What I have is I have 2 servers. I have Tiger 4, which is the server I'm running right here. And I'm going to set up a secondary on Tiger 8 is the name of the machine. My machine names are Tiger. I'm going to call this Tiger 4S. Now, just a point, I found it best not to call these primary and secondary or Tiger P and Tiger S. I try and avoid that because what you want to do, and I think it's best practice, is to flip them every once in a while. I have a client that every quarter flips it. So the primary is every quarter it changes. And when you do that, it might be helpful to name them for the data center, like Tiger 4 West and Tiger 4 East, or Tiger 4 North and Tiger 4 South. With HDR, you're going to use the network ports. So this is really the key name in setting up HDR, not the shared memory ports. Both servers are going to use port number 9088. And the steps you want to go through is set up your Informix environment. So let's go through here. And I'm in this server. I'm going to echo Informix Server. That's good. Now let's start a new connection to Tiger 8. Tiger 8 already has a server running on it called Train 1. If I echo my Informix server, oh, got to spell it right. It's called Train 1. So I need to set up a environment file for the replication. And I'm going to, I just parsed a environment file. I'll cat it so you guys can see what it looks like. That sets up my Informix server to Tiger 4S, and it sets up the on config and everything I need. So now, if I do an onstat minus, it says, okay, this server is not initialized. So I'm going to put everybody on mute, please. Please stay on mute. If you have questions, put them in the chat, and I'll get to them in just a minute. Now, for the servers to data back and forth, they have to be trusted. And there are a number of ways to trust these servers. The method I like is to use the remote server config in your on config file and create a file called, and you can call it whatever you want to. I call it HDR trust. And I put that on both servers. You have to be able to log in from one server to the other without a password. And so let me get my cheat sheet here so I can do these greps. If I look at my onstat here, I go back to 4, and boom, there's a parameter in your onstat that says this is the file that will list trusted servers. And so I can cat that file. That's in my Informix etc directory. You can call it whatever you want. It basically has two columns, the name of the host and the name of the user. And so it's saying on Tiger 4, this user is trusted, and on Tiger 8, this user is trusted. So Informix from Tiger 8 can talk to Tiger 4, and I have this on both systems. Informix on Tiger 4 can talk to Tiger 8. It's basically saying they're trusted on both systems. The second parameter that is really helpful for RSS, it's required, is log index build. And you want to enable it. By default, it's not enabled. But this way, when an index gets created, instead of sending the command to go create the index on the secondary, it will send over the pages themselves. So it sends over whole pages. A bit more network traffic, but it makes it a lot faster and more efficient for your servers. So you want to make sure both of those are in your on-config file. You also want to make sure that the SQL host file has both servers in it. So if I cat opt Informix etc SQL host, I can see I have my Train 1 server here on Tiger 4. I have another server called, which is the one I'm going to set up replication on, Tiger 4 on here. I have another server called Train 12, which I used last week for upgrading from version 12 for an example. And then I have my HDR server in here. And both servers you want to have this. I'm going to go over here to Tiger 8 and cat the SQL host file, and you can see that I have my Tiger 4 TCP here, so I know that I can connect to that. Okay, then you want to do a level 0 backup, and this is a primary. So Ontape -S -L 0. And I've got my my backup done. And there's my new backup. You can do a couple of things. I'm going to start the copy to the other server because this is going to take a few minutes. Actually, I'm going to use, I made a backup earlier. Let me just make sure it's here. Yeah, I have an earlier level 4 that I copied earlier today. We'll use that to save time. Oftentimes, this step of copying the data over is lost. So now I'm going to start on the primary. I'm going to do an on mode command to say you're the primary and the secondary is Tiger 4 TCP. Sure, I'm on the primary. Do that command. And if you come back here, it says, okay, it can't connect to the secondary. That's okay. Do an onstat minus. It says it's online and it's the primary, even though it can't connect to the secondary. That's okay. Now, we go to the secondary, and you have to make sure you've got your on config. I've already done these steps. You change, I copied the on config from the primary, and I've already changed the Informix server name to 4S and 4 TCP. And I'm going to now start a Ontape restore, a -P. And the key is the Ontape -P. So I'm on Tiger. Oh, I wanted to mention this. Because it's, I'm on machine 8, I have to rename the Tiger backup to Tiger 8 4 from 4 because I copied it from 4, but I'm on machine 8 because it's going to look for this file here. So if I do an Ontape -P, it says, okay, enter that tape, press return. Do you want to continue the restore? I'm going to say yes. Do you want to back up logs? No, because I'm starting new. And it's going to sit there for a few minutes. I wanted to show you guys this, but it's already done. I'm going to say, no, I don't have a level 1 to restore. Now it's over. So if I do an onstat -P, it's there in fast recovery mode. And in my other window here, let's get my command to look at the -F on the logs. And now I want to issue the command to change it so that it's a primary server. And I'm going to do the, I'm on the secondary. I'm saying, okay, you're the secondary and Tiger 4 TCP is the primary. And let's go over to the primary and watch what happens. It's starting recovery. It's in fast recovery. Here's the primary. And now it's still in fast recovery. It's got to go through all those logs because I've done a bit of work since I've did an older backup. But this is all you need to do to get the server up and running. And you just wait until it says I'm up and running. There's my primary. And still saying it needs, the secondary is not yet running. Yeah, maybe I had the logs, since I did that, used a back that was done earlier today, and I've done several things since then. There are just too many logs for it to catch up. Now, the last thing I wanted to point out, and then I'm going to look at questions, is how do you switch primary and secondary? Okay. First thing, if you're going to switch, so this is the old primary, it's going to become the new secondary. This is the old secondary, it's going to become the new primary. First thing, and this is really important, is make sure the old primary is shut down. Otherwise, you are going to have a problem with two primaries. And a two primary situation is a nightmare to recover. Basically, you're going to lose any transactions done on one primary. So you want to do an on mode -YUK to shut down your old primary. On the secondary, you want to do an on mode -D standard to change it to standard mode. And then after it's in standard mode, you can do an on mode -D primary and tell it that the secondary is the old primary. So this says this server now is the primary, this is the old primary. Now, the secondary server is offline. So now you need to bring it up with an on-init, and this is an undocumented feature, but it's there to bring it up in recovery mode. And it will come up in recovery mode, and then it will wait for you to give it the command that you're now the secondary, connect to the primary. And after this command is issued, the two servers will be up and running and talking. This is then the new primary, this is the new secondary. And you can flip them back and forth multiple times. I think it's a really good practice if you have HDR to do this on a regular basis, to change your servers every once in a while. So let's see how our servers are running here. It's not up as a primary. I think it's in standalone mode. I think what I need to do is bring over that new backup. I did this on a backup that was too old. So I'm going to shut this down. I'm shutting down the wrong server. That's part of the problem here. It says it's a secondary. It's still trying to do a recovery. I've got, multiple logs to recover, so it's going to take a bit of time. Let me go ahead and take a look at the chat, and let's see if there are any questions. Yeah, Jonathan, good to see you again. Good question. If there's anybody else from higher ed on, reach out to Jonathan if you're interested in talking. So shouldn't DB schema be used with SQL unloads, ASCII dumps? DB schema, yes, can be used with SQL unloads. When you do a DB export, it does the DB schema file and the unload files all at once. So that's the advantage of DB schema, is it does both at once, Jonathan. With SDS, does Informix use raw volumes? Informix will use a clustered file system like Oracle or Red Hat GFS. In fact, it requires a clustered file system. It requires a file system that can have multiple servers writing to it. It does not need to be raw volumes. And so that's a key question, Jonathan. Yes, it has to use Red Hat GFS is a good way to go with that. So Ernest has a really good question. RSS doesn't miss transactions. What it does is it gets behind. So it will get the transactions. It won't get them out of order, but it may be 1 or 2 minutes behind. It won't miss any transactions unless the network breaks, but it will get the transactions at a slower rate. The question that's key here is RSS doesn't delay, whereas HDR, until the secondary commits and it's got the transaction on disk, the primary can't continue. RSS, you can delay it for a day if you want. That's configurable, but it doesn't get them out of sequence. It gets them in the right sequence, just slower. And Tom answered, I think, that too, is it won't miss any connections. Is there an option for failover? One thing I should point out, thought I had a slide of it. The commands I gave you are basically how you do a manual failover. There are 2 Informix scripts to do this called make HDR make secondary and HDR make primary. They're supported, and there is also a auto parameter that you can turn on in your on config that will automatically convert. The problem with the auto parameter, and this is why you have to be very careful and make sure the old primary is shut down, is you don't want 2 primaries. It's extremely hard to untangle the transactions if you have two primaries to figure out which one should you trust as the real primary. And even in very sophisticated environments, I like having a person decide that we're going to cut over to the secondary and make it the primary. Um, we've worked with some very sophisticated network management systems where it's a button you push and it still runs a bunch of scripts to do the conversion, but it's a person decides that this secondary now becomes a primary, and it makes sure that the old primary is shut down. Good question. Cool. Any other questions, you guys? If not, let me dive right in and just wrap up a few things. Please go join the Informix user group if you're not a member. It's a great organization, a great way to be on top of things. The next webcast will be, oh, Jonathan, that's a really good question. It's hard to say where is the Informix user conference next year. We just held a virtual conference last week. I think this is my feeling is this is the way all user groups are going to go is to virtual conferences. With the current situation with the pandemic around the world, it's hard to have a conference with everybody there. And I hope they do another virtual conference next year. Maybe in a few years, yes. But you really want to do a virtual conference. So good question. The checklist HDR text. I'll have all these up on our website in a few days. So please just check our website. The past ones have replays on our website. If you go to our website, let me go here. Go to free tech conferences, webcast replays. Right now, the one from last month is up, and I'll have the slides and anything else that may be important. I want to point out one other thing that is on the website. I did a talk at the IBM user group webcast on migrating to 14 and migrating to the cloud the easy and the hard way. That's up on our website. The talk is not, but all the resources are up there with the project plan for upgrade, a project plan for migrating, and things like that. And I will send you the website link in chat. You did go to the website to register. So that's the website link for it. So next one, I'm going to talk about how users connect to Informix. And we're going to talk about setting up ODBC, setting up REST, setting up Java, various different things that you can do to connect users to Informix and the different ways you can do it. The fourth one we'll do is Informix HQ, setting up Informix HQ to monitor your servers. Then we have a webcast in July on database and tables in Informix. And then the last one is on Informix server monitoring. I call that everything you want to know about OnStat. When I do my DBA class, we spend about 3 hours talking about OnStat, and I'm going to try and get it down into an hour webcast for the August webcast. Another heads up, if you're interested, we have some advanced training coming up. Art Cagle and I are doing the next advanced course, July 13th to 16th. We still have a few places available. If you're interested, please sign up and let us know if you're interested. Our or else we may have to put you on a wait list if the class fills up. Each student will be assigned one of these servers. It's done on webcast like this, except with the phones unmuted. So you can ask a question in the class right away and get an answer from or I, depending on who's talking. It's a lot of fun. I learn a lot from Art every time he's there, and vice versa. We do a lot of fun. It is an advanced class. We start off, the first lab is you build your own server. And then it's a series of performance tuning tests. It's how to make Informix run faster. It's a series of exercises with different databases. We start out with a batch billing process. And the idea is to take a process that starts out, running 20 minutes and get it to run in 2 or 3 seconds. Then we take an OTP process. In the past, we've done it with 500 users. I'm thinking about upping it to 1,000 users for this next class. And we want to see how many transactions you can get. Again, you start off with about 20,000 transactions a minute. I just did a test on these machines. I rebuilt all of these machines last month, and I was able to get up to 300,000 transactions per minute on them. So I'm really excited about that. It's some good stuff in the advanced class. And data tools, we do Informix training, support, and consulting. And please let us know if you need anything. And with that, I will close off and say thank you guys for attending. This has been great to see everybody, and I look forward to seeing you guys at the next webcast. Thank you all. Have a good day and stay safe. Bye now.
Hello, this is a retake of setting up Informix HDR between two servers. I have a server called Tiger 4, and what I'm going to do is set it up as a primary and have it replicate everything to a server called Tiger 4S. Tiger 4 is on a machine named Tiger 4. Tiger 4S is going to be on a machine named Tiger 8. And what happened earlier when I did this was I did the backup early in the morning to save time. And after I did the backup and shipped it over to Tiger 8, I ran a bunch of benchmarks. And you saw me run the benchmarks. They filled up the logs and the logs wrapped. And so when I started the secondary, it didn't have all the logs that it needed to start up a secondary server. And that's why it's very important when you do set up HDR, you have the backup as close to the point where you're going to start the secondary so that the logs don't empty out or wrap, which is what happened to me earlier. So let's dive in and take a look. These are the steps I'm going to go to I'm going to start with looking at the environment and setting up the two servers as trusted. There's one additional onConfig entry I'm going to make, and then we'll make sure the SQL host files are set up. We'll do a backup, and then I'm going to start the primary. So let's go through these steps here right now. So I'm on the primary. Here's the environment file I'm using. The Informix server is Tiger 4. The alias for it is Tiger 4 TCP. And I do have it using trusted communications. Let's take a look at that. If I do an onstat-c and grep for the parameter, it says, okay, you have a file called HDR Trust that it's going to use for trusted communications. That file has to be in the Informix dir, and it has to be read only. Now it's working. So let's cat that file, and all it has in it right now is 2 entries, one for Tiger 4 and one for Tiger 8, and both entries saying the user Informix is trusted. Now let's take a look at the parameter log index build to make sure that that's in the on config. And I'm just going to do a quick grep for that. And yes, it's set to 1, so it's there and we should be good. Now I'm going to look at the SQL host file to make sure that the secondary is there. And here's my SQL host file on Tiger 4. And it has, I've got actually 2 other servers running. And then I have my HDR server running that says it's running on Tiger 8. So if I do an onstat JASD discovery, it will say, okay, you do have a server called Train 12, a server called Train 1, and a server called Tiger 4. They're all up and running on this machine. The only one we're going to replicate is this last one called Tiger 4. Now, I'm going to do a backup, and it's very simple. This is what takes a while, and I was trying to avoid. Ontape -s, tell it to do a level 0, and away it goes. Okay, now this is the key number. This is the number of the logical log that I'm at right now, and you want to keep the restore on the secondary as close to that as possible. If I look at my backups, this is the file that I just did the backup of that I want to copy over to the other server. So let me get the copy command here. Now, because I'm using directories for backups, and in my onconfig file I specify a directory, Informix gives it the file name. And it gives it a file name based on machine, server number, and level. And so on Tiger 8, this file is going to have the wrong name. Tiger 8 is going to expect it to say Tiger 8 here. So let's go over to Tiger 8. And let's look and see what's there. And it says I have the file I just copied over, and I have a file there from the previous day when I did this. So I'm going to copy that file. Let's just do it right. And I'm going to overwrite the file that says Tiger 8, because that's the backup file it's going to look for on this server. Since this server now is Tiger 8, if I do a host name, I'm at Tiger 8. And if I do an onstat here, there is no server running yet because we haven't set it up. Now, there's a bunch of stuff you need to do, and I'm going to show you a script I have built here called Setup. And This is a script, very easy to create, where I set up an environment file. I copy the onconfig after I made it a few changes, and I copy the SQL host files over. And then this is the key thing I wanted to show you. I'm going to run this, and it's going to just touch empty files so that when it does a restore, those files exist. All you have to do if you're using cooked files is touch the files. You don't have to create the DB spaces. If you're using raw files, you need to create the links to the raw files. Again, you don't have to create the DB spaces. So let's run this. And now I should have in Informix chunks, Tiger 4, a bunch of empty, and see they're all 0 byte DB spaces set up, ready to go. So I'm ready to do a restore now. And so if I do an Ontape -P, because I'm doing a physical restore, and you see, because it's expecting it to be from a directory, it says, okay, the file should be Tiger 8 -4 level 0. Press return to continue. It asks me, do I want to continue the restore? I'm going to say yes. Don't have any logs to back up because this is a brand new server, and this is the point where it waits. Now, I'd started this earlier. This is a tail -F on the online log for Tiger 8. So you can see that it started the restore. It looks like it's done. It's done a couple of checkpoints. And so I should be ready to go to set this up as a secondary. Now I don't have a level 0 to restore, so I'm going to say no. And if I do an onstat dash, it's in fast recovery. Now it's waiting for me to start up replication. So let's go back to the primary. And I'm going to give it the command to start the primary. And again, it says it's online and it's a primary now, and it's trying to connect to the secondary. So let's go over here to our secondary, and I'm going to give it the command to start a secondary. And in this other window, I'll show you right here since it came back, onstat -M, I've got a couple warnings, but it's starting fast recovery on the secondary, and it's still in fast recovery. This is what it does, is now it's talking to the primary, and over here we should see that it's talking to the primary, and it's trying to synchronize logs, and it says, okay, here's the current log, I'm going to send some pages over, and on the secondary it says, okay, I'm in read-only mode. This is what you're looking for. When you see that you're in read-only mode, you know the HDR is now established between the primary and the secondary. So if I go in here in DB Access, I see my benchmark database, my stores database, and my zip database that I was using to do benchmarks. But let's go in here to the primary, and I'm not going to connect. I'm going to create a database. I'm going to create a new database on the primary, create a table, and insert some records. And it's done.
And so now let's come over here on the secondary. I'm going to say database select, and there is my new database and new table. And let's go into query language. I have a script here to select. These are the records I just inserted over here. So right now I have HDR working between the primary and the secondary. And as long as I make changes on the primary, they will automatically replicate over to the secondary. The secondary is in warm standby mode, which is exactly where I want it to be. Okay, so we have got HDR set up. We've tested the connection. We know that HDR works because we created a table on one server and it got sent over to the secondary. Now let's switch modes, and I'm going to show you the manual method. What we're going to do is take the primary down and make the secondary the primary. Now this is a couple of points I want to make here, and this is why I don't like having the name secondary on the secondary, because at any time you want to be able to switch. And I like doing something like east and west, or the name of the data center, or the city where it's located, or even one and two, so that, and it's a good practice to, when you have HDR on some kind of regular basis, switch them so that what was a secondary becomes a primary and the primary becomes a secondary. Now, it's key that when you do the switch, and I'm going to show you the manual commands to do it. In this document, I also have the Informix HDR make primary and HDR make secondary commands that come with Informix. There is also a parameter to auto do it in your onconfig file. The problem I have, and you have to be very careful, is you don't want two primaries. So the first thing I'm going to do is take down the primary, shut it down. Then I'm going to change the secondary to a standard machine. At this point, your users can connect to the secondary and start using it for updates. You're ready to go. But I'm going to then change the secondary and make it a primary. Now, this is key. If there's not too big a lag, if you've had users working on it and loaded millions of records and gone through lots of logs, this won't work. But if there's not too big a lag, on the old primary, I can start it up in physical recovery mode and make it a secondary, and it will connect to the new primary and synchronize. And so this is what we're going to attempt to do here. So let me go to the primary, and let me get out of these screens. So I'm on the primary here. I'm going to do an on mode -y UK to shut it down. And as soon as I left, it shut down. Let's do a check on it. It stopped. So now I'm on the secondary. And let's look at the commands. To switch them. First, I'm going to make it a standard server. Now, standard server is your regular server. People, once it's done, it will say it's online and people can start doing updates on it. So this is the 3 or 4, minute interval when you switch from primary to secondary. Now you need to change all your users, but now it says, okay, it's online and it's a standard server. Now, since I want to restart replication, I'm going to do the on mode command that says this server is a primary and the secondary is Tiger 4 TCP, the other server. And now, if I do an onstat minus, it's up, it's the primary. Let's go back here to Tiger 4, that was stopped. And here we're going to do the physical startup. This is going to start it up in physical mode and just wait until I tell it to become the secondary. Okay, if I do an onstat minus, it's in fast recovery. I'm going to tell it, I'm saying you are the secondary and the primary is Tiger 4 TCP. And let's see how it's doing. It says read-only secondary. So because I hadn't had many log file changes, it came up real quick and very nice and clean. So that's how you switch. And you can switch back and forth all day. It's a good idea to practice switches. Some of our clients do this on a quarterly basis. They have a disaster recovery plan where once a quarter they switch between the primary and secondary. I think that's a great idea. The more you practice this, the better off you will be. And so with that, that's the end of my edition. I appreciate you guys listening in and look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you and have a good day.